자아상어천호 합의인들이 나중에 자, 유니트는 in forum comparable to most in forum of sich in with me in forum 우리 이자서와 단서서 하다가 First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of the forum for giving me this wonderful opportunity to speak here at my own institution. And world problem, nomad solution sounds pretty ambitious to me. Even to me. Yet, what I'm going to argue, no doubt, will sound preposterous to many. But that's what I've come to realize recently. And what I've also learned is that what I'm arguing now was actually the received wisdom of during the first half of the last century. So the title is not that grandiose after all. Debunking the hegemonic theory of the origin of the state involves refuting a series of theories, including the theories of the origin and nature of the state, the theories of the nomadic empires, as well as theories of the origin and nature of pastoral nomadism. Debunking also involves replacement, and the conquest theory is up to the task. Yet, it has been reinforced by the idea of extrahuman transportation that not only explains why societies with no means of non-human transportation remain small and egalitarian, but also clarifies the origin of inequality and the state. Though the concept of extrahuman transportation can embrace all non-human means of transportation, as for the origin of this state, the relevance belongs to animals, to herd animals, as well as boats. And while Eurasia is the home of major herd domesticates, its steppe empires dominated world history up until the rise of the maritime powers. The paper thus places pastoral nomadism at the origin of the state in civilization and the Eurasian steppe at the center of human history. As such, the paper advances radically different understanding of the origin and nature of the state, and thus advances fundamentally a new vision of human history, one that sees human journey as neither fated nor as doomed or stuck. This is what I've tried to do in the Nomadic Leviathan, and the present paper is an attempt to summarize the book's main argument. Now, my quest to the problem had its origins in my thoughts regarding the dominant scholarly explanation of the Eurasian nomadic empires and their relationship with sedentary areas, especially the region that is now China. According to the hegemonic theory, initially developed by old Latimors, developed in old Latimors in the ancient frontiers of China, in vast infertile nomadic Eurasia, the state was impossible and unnecessary. Ecologically, economically, socially, and politically, the steppe could not produce the state or afford to have it. Equally, it was not required. Ecologically, the steppe is barren. Extensive pastoral economy is non-autarkic. It produces no surplus, and it can barely sustain few nomads, let alone a state. As Latimore put it, The pure nomad is the poor nomad. Pastoralism simply cannot afford this state. It also forces the small population to disperse over an extensive area. Consequently, socially and politically, nomads are pacifist. They are forced to split into small groups, such as clans. If they form larger groups, they form tribes, and occasionally temporarily confederations, essentially larger kinship groups. Tribal organization is sufficient to fill the needs of pastoral economy, hence nomads need no state. Why? Because according to the science-centric paradigm, if there was no fertile land encircled by an inescapable barrier, then the state would never have risen. Mother Nature created areas of circumscribed agricultural land and endowed them with peasants whose hyper-reproduction and overcrowding led to food shortages. Peasants fought for food, and the village that was defeated had nowhere to flee, had no choice but to submit to the victors, and had to produce more food than it had produced before. Only in such areas, and only in this way, did early states rise, and by implication, this was part of Mother Nature's design. The state rose as an agent of agriculture, and it emerged as a product of economy as much as ecology. Yet, historically, it was the Eurasian steppe empires that dominated the pre-modern world. At least from the Shunnu to the rise of the maritime powers, Eurasian steppe had been a home to successive empires that dominated whole of Eurasia. The science-centric paradigm thus faces an anomaly. The paradigm attributes the dominance of the Eurasian steppe empires to their military superiority. And this poses further questions. How could such military superiority, a military force that supersedes agrarian armies, had been created if there had been no centralized political power and organization comparable to that of agrarian empires? By what means, then, were Eurasian nomads able to afford to field such a military force if the steppe was infertile and its economy unable to support poor nomads? How was it possible for nomads to do this repeatedly for much of human history if it was an ecological, economic, social, and political impossibility? To come to terms with this fact, the paradigm was forced to devise alternative theories of the origin of the nomadic empires. While theories of secondary phenomena are enduring, theories of extraordinary phenomena challenge them. The earliest theory tasked townsmen installed charismatic leaders upon poor wild men and to build empires, a sort of civilizing mission. As revisionist theory elevated charismatic leaders who built imperial confederacies in order to overcome agrarian defense and to seize agrarian wealth, a shift that transferred agency to nomads. Yet it was still to be the secondary phenomenon, agrarian power forced response from the state. In negation of secondary phenomena, notions of abrupt climate change along with charisma were mobilized to overcome ecological and economic impossibilities. Climate disaster-driven poverty has been given the task of bringing about this state only to be quickly abandoned in favor of climate blessing-driven wealth and prosperity, while the former was repurposed as the source of extreme political instability. The state on this step is therefore a product of abnormal climate. Since the state is impossible and unnecessary on this step, it is clear that the root cause of the nomadic empires should be sought elsewhere. Whether they be agrarian encounters or extraordinary natural phenomena, Exogenous forces are obviously not enough to explain the rise of the nomadic empires. The Sinocentric paradigm combines them with the extraordinary or even the supernatural in the form of charisma. The Eurasian steppe is the breeding ground of military and chiefly charisma. And the nomadic empires are personal creations of charismatic warlords. The steppe empires emerge as excesses of charisma. In sharp contrast, because its ecology and economy generate the state, China, for instance, does not need charisma, and it indeed has virtually none. Either way, with these theories, what these theories devise is an anomalous, shadowy, state-like formation, the nomadic empire, variously described as shadow empire, imperial confederacy, tribal confederation, loose framework of tribes, and tribal alliances. The nomadic empires are fundamentally anomalous because the state is not normal on this state. They are state-like because they are not typical or genuine state. They are shadows of the normal empire. Not only are they themselves anomalous creatures, but also they are the creations of abnormal forces. However, since they not only rose over and over again, but also dominated much of recorded history, they actually emerge as the normal and the typical, turning the exception into the rule. There is also a theory of the form and nature of the nomadic empires. There are two types, the tribal or inferior confederacy and the empire or centralized empire. The nomadic empire is a super-tribal structure. It is a confederation of tribes. It remains a tribal confederation if it stays on the state, or becomes an empire if it conquers agrarian regions such as China. Hence, there has actually never been a nomadic empire. There are tribal confederations and agrarian empires, albeit of nomadic origin. The designation nomadic empire is therefore a sort of euphemism. In sharp contrast, Chinese empire is a centralized bureaucratic territorial polity under an emperor, a dynastic autocratic monarch who succeeded through primogeniture. While the tribal confederacy is a product of the personal bond of the Khan with his followers, the empire is a centralized, bureaucratic, impersonal, territorial administrative structure. Hence, with the conquest of China or other cultural area, the tribal confederacy undergoes a metamorphosis. It becomes an empire, the Great Han, the emperor. Thus, we also see a theory of transformation from tribal confederacy to empire. To become an empire, a tribal confederacy has to acquire all the features of the agrarian empire and cleanse itself of all tribal elements. To become an emperor, the Great Han has to dissolve the Great Hanship and become a dynastic, bureaucratic, institutional monarch. With the establishment of primogeniture, the Great Han becomes the emperor, the tribal confederacy becomes empire. In doing this, however, the paradigm has created an empire that does not conquer, but gets conquered, yet remains an empire by absorbing its conquerors, a cultural community that is predicated upon assimilation and homogeneity. The Chinese absorbed through empire. By devising this concept, the paradigm has effectively redefined the concept of empire as a defensive and assimilative cultural homogeneity. However, empire is anything but cultural homogeneity. By definition, it is expansive and heterogeneous. Thus, the Chinese absorptive empire emerged as another anomaly, that has also lasted for much of recorded history. Moreover, the great Huns had rarely practiced primogeniture, so they appear to have invariably failed to become emperors, and their khanates failed to become empires. However, unlike the acclaimed Roman emperors and the elected Holy Roman emperors, the Eurasian great Huns were invariably hereditary monarchs. Thus, if primogeniture was the hallmark of emperorship, the Roman and the Holy Roman emperorship could be defined as tribal chieftainship at best. The Chinese emperorship also emerged as another anomaly. The Sinocentric paradigm also presents a theory of historical cycles, a pan-Eurasian historical pattern of nomadic domination of agricultural areas that began in the 8th century BC with the rise of pastoral nomadism in the steppe and lasted until the early 20th century. The pattern is counterintuitive because small, ephemeral, acephalous, and vociferous groups of poor nomads dominate enduring, centralized, large, wealthy, populous empires for much of recorded history. However, since this is a pattern that has endured, it actually forms the norm rather than the abnormal. And it forms a fundamental contradiction to the scheme's evolutionary premises. The inferior is to dominate the superior. The Sinocentric paradigm thus crowds the pre-modern past with anomalies. Anomalous states, anomalous empires, anomalous emperorships, and an anomalous pattern of nomadic domination. Since nomadic domination lasted for most of the recorded history, the past or history itself becomes an anomaly. Yet the anomalies don't end here. They extend to the origin and nature of pastoral nomadism, embracing agents, methods, definitions, time and space of domestications of animals. The steppe nomadism emerges in China, and it is the proto-Chinese who domesticated pastoral animals and developed nomadism and eventually moved into Mongolia due to the expansion of intensive agriculture. Pastoral nomadism was also meant to emerge as a survival technique of the recluse who were displaced by ever-expanding Chinese agriculture. As such, pastoral nomadism was made a devolutionary deviation and an evolutionary dead end. Lkhamsuren's making of pastoral nomadism a byproduct of Chinese expansion also fits well with his people of Inner Asia with Proto-Chinese, thus to populate China and Mongolia with a racially homologous population. Lkhamsure defines pastoral nomadism as the extreme phase of steppe nomadism. Advancing narrowest possible definition of nomadism, thus delaying the emergence of pastoral nomadism, Lkhamsure places its emergence after the rise of the state. To do this, Lkhamsure equated pastoral nomadism with horse riding with cavalry, and cavalry with mounted archery. In this way, pastoral nomadism was made to emerge around the 4th century BCE. Lkhamsure thus claims early sets as the monopoly of agriculture and peasants. Pastoral nomadism was also being equated with extensiveness and poverty, and the definition was aimed at creating a sharpest possible dichotomy between the civilization and the barbarian plague. The question of pastoralism with extensiveness and poverty disqualified nomadism as the economic foundation of the state too. Lkhamsure's treatment of mobility and pastoral nomadism fundamentally shaped subsequent scholarship, and especially anthropological theorization of social, political, and economic organization. Ultimately, while Lkhamsure's treatment of mobility came to fruition, that was the Lkhamsure theory. Latimer's treatment of mobility postured and fundamentally shaped subsequent scholarship, and especially anthropological theorization of social and political and economic organization. Ultimately, while Latimer's treatment of mobility came to fruition in Robert Carnero's as well as William Irons's theory, his treatment of nomadism also attains its logical elaboration in Anatoly Hazanov's and Robert Druce's. While the main aim of Carnero's environmental circumscription is to eliminate mobility as escape and thus to facilitate population pressure and political subordination, the main aim of Irons's ease of geographical mobility is to facilitate dispersal in low population density and thus to facilitate an egalitarian political order. Latimer surgically separates those engaged in intensive and specialized agriculture as the Chinese from those engaged in food gathering, hunting, fishing, and primitive agriculture. Yet in defining nomadism in narrowest possible way, he imposed Chinese identity on people who herd horses, cattle, and sheep and hunt, who sacrifice horse and other domestic animals to their sky god, and who are heavy meat eaters and drinkers, and who are warlike. Latimer also imposed a proto-Chinese identity on the Rong and the Di against their will, culture, and language, as well as on rural Altai speakers against the evidence and scholarly knowledge of the time. However, recent scholarship decisively rejects Latimer's imposition of proto-Chinese identity on the Rong and Di. Furthermore, if Karl Bishop, Wolfram Eberhard, Jacques Grenet all argued for invasion theory and held the Shang and the Zhou rulers to be of nomadic origin, recently Edwin Fully-Blanc and Victor Mayer have also maintained Shang and Zhou to be of nomadic origin too. While extensiveness and poverty define nomadism for Latimer, economic one-sidedness and no authority or even anti-authority define Hazanov's traditional extensive pastoral economy. However, Latimer's idea of extensive and intensive economies is also misleading. He adopted the idea from Karl Wittvogel, who used them to distinguish between irrigated and non-irrigated agriculture, showing that irrigated agriculture was more labor-intensive and than non-irrigated agriculture. And Wittvogel's extensive means labor efficiency. Because of its labor extensiveness and high productivity, cattle breeding was, for example, advantageous to irrigation farming. With Latimer's misappropriation, Wittvogel's initial idea was lost, and extensive and intensive were established as forms of economy. Subsequent anthropological theorizations adopted Latimer's extensive economy and rationalized it precisely how Latimer conceptualized it, and it eventually resulted in Hazanov's anti-authority or dependence. However, when we adopt Wittvogel's initial conceptualization, it produces radically different understanding of pastoral economy, a highly labor-efficient economy. To give a crude idea, according to the National Statistical Office of Mongolia, Mongolia presently has a pastoral economy of 67 million livestock and a population of 3.2 million people. However, about 289,000 people aged above 15, that is less than 10% of the population, run the nation's pastoral economy. Areas of circumscribed agricultural land gave birth to this state. Yet, as Jared Diamond eloquently describes, New Guinea Grand Valley emerged as an ideal area of circumscribed agricultural land. The surrounding jungles is not only hard to traverse, but also inhospitable. Anyone who does not have enough provisions faces starvation. Carnera's quintessential circumscribed agricultural land. The Dani have developed intensive agriculture as immobile as Carnera's ancient Peruvians. They are pure peasants with no animals to ride or pack. When it was discovered in 1938, the valley boasted a population of 50,000 strong, nearly doubling Carnera's minimum of 30,000 and equaling that of ancient Uruk, with population density equal to that of the United States at 32 people per square kilometer. Yet instead of forming a state or kingdom or even chiefdom, the Dani agricultures, just like Amazon and Yanomama, formed autonomous local communities of small settlements and hamlet clusters, each with its own headman. They were also engaged in regular warfare, which did not usually result in the subjugation of the defeated and immediate or permanent occupation of the land by the victor. While the average size of the largest political unit varied from 180 to 4,200 individuals, the average territory of largest political group remains between 3.7 to 12 square miles that are convenient visiting distance from members. Very large territories could not be utilized or protected by the techniques of the highland peoples. Neither the circumscribed area, nor the irrigated agriculture, nor the population density led even to a chiefdom, let alone shadowy empire or imperial confederacy. The condition of the Dani and Yanomama is exactly what Herbert Spencer called the necessary limitation imposed upon human grouping by food supply. Many, including Napoleon Chagnon and Carnera, observed it among Amazonian populations. The observations and arguments are valid. However, their explanations are misplaced. The fundamental limitation on human social complexity is not the availability of food supply, but human physical capability to travel and carry. While the Sinocentric paradigm equated mobility with flights and dispersal, in emphasizing its military and conquest aspects, the conquest theory tended to equate it with migration rather than mobilization and concentration. Thus, conquest theorists failed to understand the fact that when humans were themselves the only means of transportation, their physical capability to travel and carry determined the scope of their operation and the amount of their production and the size and the structure of their community. It was the human physical capability to travel and carry that kept Dani, Yanomama, and similar communities small and egalitarian, as it forced them to fit into an area that could support them. Human physical capability, which puts a limit on the distance humans can traverse and the load they can carry, set limits on the size of area they could occupy and the community they could form in any given area. Any excess, territory, produce, or population was futile and unsustainable. As such, immobility was the natural circumscription to human power, property, and domination. It provided a natural immunity to inequality. As long as it endured, nothing was to change. The domestication of animals and consequently the use of draught animals liberated humans from this natural circumscription and empowered herdsmen to emerge as herders of their fellow humans. A flock of sheep as a mobile provision of war bands made early conquest possible, draft animals destroyed equality permanently. Freeing humans from their natural constraints, extrahuman transportation brought a revolution. Empowering those who commanded them, they augmented the scope of their operations, the amount they could produce, and the size and structure of their communities. In making long-distance operation with heavy loads possible, extrahuman transportation made the occupation of large areas and the integration of many communities possible. Conquest, domination, exploitation become possible only because of extrahuman transportation. It was extrahuman transportation rather than environmental circumscription, mobility, or animal husbandry, and not immobility in agriculture that made state and civilization possible. The revolutionary factor that facilitated the rise of the state, the nomadic Leviathan, was actually the rise of pastoral nomadism. Once we recognize that the state cannot exist without extrahuman transportation, we are prepared to look for animal domestication in the old world. And once we also recognize that the state is impossible without monopoly of violence, we are prepared to look for the rise of the war band. And once we recognize that it is not population growth and wealth differentiation, but unification and integration that bring hierarchy and social stratification, we are prepared to look for conquest. And once we accept war and conquest as a matter of life and death, we are prepared to recognize the war band as a community of common political struggle, of life and death, a community that legitimizes violence, and a community that is governed by law and discipline. And once we also look at the imperium, the prototype of political power, the authority to administer legitimate violence, we are prepared to appreciate the nature of significance of warlordship. And once we combine the mobility of pastoralists with labor efficiency of animal husbandry and the nature of herd and life that promotes leadership, rationalism, and martial virtues that the conquest here is emphasized, we are in better position to understand Weber's military differentiation, Max Weber's military differentiation. All these conceptualizations allow us to look at the nature and the logic of nomadic political order and the significance of its hierarchically nested numerical divisional system, and see it in new light as a military constitution. The very act of creation of the war band was actually the invention of military political authoritarian structure of command and obedience, the state. The hierarchically nested numerical divisional system that was used by all the Indonesian empire builders in a variety of forms, the most common being the decimal system, was the military political authoritarian structure. The system was itself a creation of war and military political constitution, a legal political framework that constituted body politic and distributed power and authority within it. The system created single, legible, concentric, and conical body politic with a top-down, hierarchical, monocratic, pyramidal power structure that incorporated the population into hierarchically nested numerical divisions and concentrated power in the hands of the monarch. The numerical divisional system was a work of human intellect, a constitution and a military constitution that embodied a body politic and organized political power within the body politic. This was the constitution of the Indonesian polity, and it was what Hobbes calls the Leviathan and Weber calls human community that monopolizes violence. As John Rawls maintains, a theory, however elegant and economical must be rejected or revised if it is untrue. The Sino-centric paradigm is not just untrue, it is ugly. It was devised to advance a colonial agenda and strengthen up Mongolia of sovereignty, thereby reducing it into Chinese frontiers, its raison d'etre. The discovery doctrine, the agricultural argument, the theory of original accumulation, and the evolutionary materialism all form its foundation and all underpin it, and all are forms of colonial chauvinism. Tribal stands for a lack of sovereignty and renders any given territory into terra nullius. The Sino-centric paradigm is a part and parcel of the colonial doctrine that became the vision of history, and it needs to be overcome. Thank you.
Okay, a little bit conscious of time, but I think we're going to have another 10 minutes. So I'd like to field a few questions, perhaps one at least to David and one to Munkh-Erdene. Stay here. And if you're going to come up. Right. Any questions? Working. Okay, Eric.
Let me ask a question for David related to oligarchs, which is something I've also been trying to grapple with, and the sense of reception also, like how the general public perceives and responds to vast differences in wealth. And you sort of alluded in the presentation to some forms of resistance and how that might play out in the election of a populist leader. But I think we also see kind of an accommodation or even a reverence of sort of extremely rich people that may relate to the ways in which they kind of redistribute wealth. And we were talking about the big men earlier on here with Tom earlier on, and our perhaps to me a somewhat surprising discovery that many herders actually are happy to be exploited in a sense, and it seems perhaps that a more sort of conventional Marxist interpretation would be this is a form of false consciousness. That I would have anticipated that would have been sort of driven into people's minds at some point during the socialist period in Mongolia, but appears to have either been reversed or perhaps never really made its way into the Mongolian conception all along. I wonder if we look farther back, based on your comments on aristocratic relations, whether there is not only a paternalistic sort of top-down kind of like ownership, property rights kind of relationship with the less powerful in society, but also kind of an acceptance and even a desire to build that as maybe a patron-client type of relationship or something along those lines.
Yes, thank you very much for that excellent question. I had to cut out very large parts of the talk to get it into the time. I'm sorry it was even so rather long. And part was to speak to those clientelistic relations in both periods. Now, obviously, they're different in the aristocratic era. More conventional, you've got a whole sort of range of, for example, public literature which celebrate sort of patrimonial relationships of various sorts. And today, indeed, the sort of hero billionaire is a well-known feature in Mongolia, but also, I couldn't help but notice that the Sapiens book, Yuval, had a quote from Bill Gates on the front cover to help sell it. So it's not unique to Mongolia, and it's widely felt. I think you're right. I mean, I think to reduce it to false consciousness in the old Marxist way is not very helpful. And my own view is that false consciousness was only ever false if you think of it in class terms. It has to be rather narrowly within the notion of a revolutionist that it is a false consciousness. If you're dealing with the individual family, with your own individual interests, it's not necessarily a false consciousness at all, because the benefits you may get yourself and your family and friends from clientelistic relations with extremely rich and powerful people may be a far better way of realizing your own aspirations than banding together in some notional block and overthrowing them. So, a long-winded answer to an excellent question. Thank you.
Right. This Fox.
Thank you. My question is also for question first, or if you want me to go. My question is for David as well, so should I?
Oh, it's okay, yeah.
It's okay. Okay, and it's also kind of inspired by the previous question. I was just wondering to what extent you think gender relations and family dynamics in terms of hierarchical family, older brother, younger brother dynamics also play into paternalistic systems.
Yes, very interesting, and again, something I had to cut out. Interestingly, the Udzen, I mean, of course, lord, or master, which we translate, is gendered. Udzen is not so clearly gendered. So you could actually have, I think, Udzen was a term for the woman of the household, the kind of hearth mistress. So, so the gender features of the discursive gender features of Mongolian, if you like, domestic politics is slightly different because not so clear in the language.